Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, January 7th, 2016. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. Believe it or not, it has been over a month since we've done one of these, so Happy New Year to you. It's great to be back. So much has happened over the past month, and I believe our own, the man in the hat, has a New Year's present for Luke that you've been holding on to.
I do, actually. It's a new year, and I just wanted to cheers it in by giving
there you
one
go.
of my famous IPAs here.
How about that?
You know what?
With love.
You know what?
What a way to start the year. There you go. Cheers
History.
to everyone.
Oh my God. That is absolute carbonic acid. My eyes are watering.
So there you have it.
Wow.
Welcome back to the show.
Cheers to you.
A lot to discuss. Let's get right into it. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com and the Washington Post. And that is the man in the hat, the very giving man in the hat, thoughtful man in the hat.
What do you got for me?
Yeah, and me.
Thoughtful. You could have taken a dump in a bag and given it to me.
Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com. All right, guys, let's get into it. Wednesday on UFC Tonight, Dana White was on and dropped a couple interesting nuggets. Let's start with Holly Holm. He's taking it back.
Just taking it off the table.
Don't spill that.
Dropped a couple interesting nuggets. He did say that Holly Holm will fight someone not named Ronda Rousey next. And not that long ago, in Bristol, Dana said that her next fight would be against Ronda Rousey. So something clearly has changed. What do you make of this decision?
I don't know if it was managerial pushback or if it was just a realization based on any kind of talks with Rousey or their own schedule internally. Remember last year they released the schedule publicly, all at once. There's probably a few reasons they didn't do that this year, not to tip off Bellator or who knows, just to keep things flexible. But any kind of situation there may have influence or decision making. But I think it's the right call. I don't think there's any situation you could go to, any permutation that wouldn't carry some kind of risk. It is, of course, a risk that if Holm goes and faces, let's say it's Tate, that's the presumptive candidate here, and she loses, that is problematic. But for me, I made this point. You have two women's divisions. It's not like you have to have the most rigid of architecture. And oh, by the way, CM Punk is going to fight in the UFC in 2016. Spare me your adherence to by the book code. You need to fudge with it, you can't. And the reality is, even if Holm loses to Tate, you can do a Tate-Rousey fight.
Yeah.
You can still do a Rousey-Holm 2 without the belt. I'm not arguing that without the belt it's just as good. Obviously it'd be better if everything works out neatly. But with Rousey being on the shelf for God knows how long, at least 6 months, you can't keep the champ on the shelf. Put her to work. Tate is a reasonable candidate. That's a great fight. Last point about Holly Holm. I think we underestimated how much, not just the win did for her, but the post-win media blitz she did.
Yeah.
Before that fight, she had 18,000 likes on Facebook. I checked today. She has almost 1.4 million. She has taken a massive leap in exposure. Let's put that to use. Let's see if that vehicle can go pretty fast. I bet that it can.
What do you think?
I think that the original decision to hold off and wait for Ronda Rousey in a rematch was entirely an economic decision, and I just don't think that that's the way you make matches. I think that I understand that the UFC is in business to make money. I understand that. However, once you put a championship belt on the line, once that's part of the picture, you need to treat it as something that with respect. And Holly Holm was ready, willing, and able to defend that championship. She should not be waiting for Ronda Rousey to make a movie and host Saturday Night Live and pose in the magazine I work for and all that kind of stuff. There are other things. Those things are great if you can fit them into your schedule, but the schedule can't revolve around that. You're running a fight game.
That's right.
Well, it just sounds to me like somebody should have their promotional license revoked because that's supposed to be the...
Great comment. That is a great comment.
Well,
That made no sense when he said it.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
I just think that, going into that fight, it was just such a foregone conclusion that Ronda Rousey was going to win. It was like all telegraphed. She's going to beat Holly Holm, and then she's going to take time off, all catering to UFC 200 after she did this movie and this and that and this and that. Well, it all changed. I mean, obviously, when Holly Holm wins the belt, it should change. If Ronda Rousey is still going to be upholding whatever she had going on besides the fight game, and she's still going to do that schedule, there's no reason the new champion should be on that schedule. She should not have to be on that schedule. It doesn't even make sense to be on that schedule, especially like when you said That you've got people like Miesha Tate, who was promised the title shot and everything else, waiting in the wings. You have a perfect storyline to just have that segue fight, or regardless who wins, you got a big fight with Ronda Rousey at UFC 200. So to me, I was like, it all changed, and it makes complete sense for them to say, we don't want to leave Holly Holm waiting until July to fight again. It just makes more sense from everybody's perspective, particularly with Ronda basically taking herself out of competition for the time being. So I feel like they've got it right. I was very confused with the original sort of thinking with it.
It is beautiful. It is a beautiful full circle. I'll just jump with this, that Miesha Tate is promised a title fight. She's all ready to do that, and all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from under her, and now she was sort of pushed to the side. And while we have not heard that she's the one, it seems to stand to reason that she's going to be the one that's going to get the fight. And so it's kind of a great full circle of her being kind of disrespected, and then in the end, getting what she deserves.
Also, can you imagine a scenario where Tate wins against Holm and then defends the belt against Rousey? That's not a huge mega fight. Yeah. Be serious. And last thing I'd say, Holm, I think she's 34, 35 years old. Yep. Clock's ticking, man. She doesn't have a whole lot of time left. 100%. To just piss away 6 months on the count of Rousey makes not a lot of sense.
It feels like a win-win for the UFC. As you mentioned, Rousey Tate 3 with Tate as champion is huge.
That's massive.
Holm Rousey 2 is huge as well. To your point, you nailed it when you said that she's become a huge star since winning. I think that really speaks to how big of a star Ronda was, because when Weidman beat Anderson, he did not take Anderson's crown and put it on his head, and I think that speaks to just how not big of a star Anderson was here in the United States. He didn't really, he got more popular, but not like Holm beating Rousey. That was a game changer, and everyone who was a huge Rousey admirer or supporter or just an observer of hers was like, who's this girl who just beat her? Who's this girl that just beat Ronda Rousey? So that is a great point as well. But my takeaway from this announcement was, okay, what does this say about the state of Ronda Rousey? Because if the plan was to have Ronda Rousey fight at UFC 200, would they really risk it for maybe the biggest show in UFC history to have Holly fight a few months before? Because if Holly fights a few months before, does that sort of cancel her out of the UFC 200 sweepstakes? And what does that mean for Ronda? Because I feel like she has to come back in a title fight. So where's Ronda at these days? She's going to do SNL. She's going to do a movie. Is Ronda taking the year off? Is she going to fight? I really, that to me said a lot about the current state of Ronda Rousey. I don't know about you guys. I don't know if I'm looking into it.
No,
but that was my takeaway.
Yeah, but she also is we can look at Ronda as something bigger than a fighter. We can look at her as a celebrity. She is a transcendent celebrity that, unlike anything the sport has ever seen other than her. However, she's also a fighter who is now on a one-fight losing streak. Yeah. And I think that we can't allow all the icing to obscure the cake. The bottom line is that Holly Holm won the title, and then the next question was, well, is there going to be a rematch? And immediately all we heard was, yes, there's going to be a rematch. Well, was that because this was a close, competitive fight? That wasn't the case, certainly. Was it because Ronda Rousey was dominant before then? Maybe, but Jose Aldo was a pretty dominant champion. We haven't heard word one about him getting a shot at redemption against Conor McGregor. So the UFC can't sort of go both. They can't have it both ways. If you have a brand new champion at featherweight and you want to ride him, and you're going to sort of like shove Jose Aldo, who had a 10-year winning streak, off to the side, and then you're going to hold on to Ronda Rousey because she's a big star. I just don't think it works that way. You gotta look at the fights and say, does this performance deserve a rematch? And I think you can make a really strong argument that Ronda Rousey's performance in that fight did not deserve a rematch.
But if Ronda wanted the rematch and was ready to fight in March or April or whenever this fight, we know it's not going to happen in January or February, she's getting that rematch.
Yeah, sure.
Even though she got smoked, she's getting that rematch.
Sure.
To me, it says she wasn't ready for the rematch.
But within parameters. You can't just hold on forever.
Sure.
I think part of the reason why she's not ready, I don't know how much, so for example, this week, as you mentioned, she's doing the Sports Illustrated swimsuit stuff.
One presumes she did that a while ago.
Okay, here's my point, though.
Yeah.
She's doing SNL at the end of the month, and then 2 more movies. To your point, some of this might have been booked after the fight because there's still a tremendous amount of interest in her. But a bunch of it wasn't. Like the movies and stuff, that didn't just fall into her lap. This has been it seems to me that the train left the station for her stuff in her career outside of fighting. And you would think a moment like what happened to her in Australia would be a recalibrating moment. But she's not making any adjustments that I can tell related to fighting preparation that is adjusting around what happened in Australia. And I understand if people, look, how many times are you going to get offered to be in a Hollywood movie about your own life?
Yeah.
You got to strike with the iron in his hat. I get it, but it just goes to the challenge of trying to have these. No fighter has. Fighters have been in movies. Rampage was in the A-Team, but no one has had these sustained careers. Can you be a high-level fighter and a legit A-list celebrity at the same time? I don't know if that's possible. We're going to find out in 2016.
And who'd have thought that her first public appearance would be on Saturday Night Live, of all places?
It's a pretty deft move, though.
It is an awesome move. I was going to say that because you think about how self-serious she was this whole way through and what she just lost, going into silence and all these things. What is the best way to combat something like that?
Yeah.
Levity.
Yeah.
And she gets to this platform. You know, SNL is so smart in how they handle that sort of thing. I just, when I heard that, I was like, that is the absolute perfect move for her to do.
And I think it also speaks to the fact that, you know, when Conor was rising and surging and making that run to the title, people are like, if he loses, the Conor McGregor train is done. It's over. When Ronda loses, she's done. And I feel like we keep saying this, losses in MMA don't mean as much as people think. You know, like there's still interest in her. She's still a very popular person. SNL still wants her after she got her head kicked off. Sports Illustrated still wants her after that loss. Losses don't mean as much as people think, and maybe this is a sign of that. Okay, so that's one of the things that Dana talked about. He also said that he's interested in Conor McGregor fighting at 155. That's what Conor wants. That's what his team wants. They want him to fight at 155, and they want it to be soon. He wants to fight 4 times in 2016. And Dana said that if and when he does fight at 155, he won't be forced to drop the 145 title. What do you make of that decision?
Think of it from Frankie Edgar's position. Think of a guy who, while he was the 155-pound champion, was being egged on to move down to 145 pounds. While he's the champion, you know, so it's like he finally adheres to that. Like he did lose, you know, he lost his belt. He goes down. He does fight for the featherweight belt. He loses that, but now he's on this streak. He finally gets to the point where he can actually fight for the belt for the division they wanted him to go in, and now he's in a purgatory. He has to wait because there's a guy who they're allowing to do the exact opposite thing that he was not going to be allowed to do, which was to carry his belt down. If they wanted him going to 145, he had to get rid of his belt. It's a double slap in the face to Frank Edgar. Now, besides all that, Frank Edgar and Conor McGregor are two different, entirely different people. So I can understand in one way why the UFC is saying, let's make this guy, let's give him what he wants. He wants to do this. He's a huge sell. We're going to let him fight for both belts. You can understand that from their perspective, saying like, why not? But like you said, he better fight 4 times a year. He better maybe even 5 times a year, because it's like if he doesn't, he's holding up a division, one division or the other. So it's like he's going to have to, because if you look at title fights in general, they usually fight between what, 2 and 3 times a year, 2 and 3 title fights. Just cut that in half and say 5. He'd almost have to fight 5 times. It's sort of ludicrous because he's not going to, you know, just the reason it doesn't usually work is it doesn't. I don't think it can work for very long, just given those parameters. But that's just my feeling on it. But I can understand 100% why the UFC would want to give him this historic sort of, you know, gesture, given his draw power in the sport.
Yeah, that's what you said about the 4 times, 4 fights in the year. It has to be that way. I mean, how else are you going to sustain 2 weight classes with one champion? I mean, you know, assuming that he's able to go and do what he says he's going to do. And even if he doesn't, even if he goes up and fights Dos Anjos and loses, well, what does that do to his featherweight standing? Or do people look at him a little differently? You know, there's so many X factors at play here, and I'm fine with them doing this if they want to. But the fact remains, between Rafael Dos Anjos and Conor McGregor, we have champions in 2 weight classes who between them have 1 title defense. And so we can call this a super fight if it comes to fruition, but how super is it when you've got 1 title defense between 2 guys, and each one of them has a real logical next opponent sitting there waiting?
So you don't agree with it?
You know, from an economic standpoint, I understand what they're doing, and I'm okay with it as long as McGregor, as long as there are some parameters that say that McGregor, okay, you're going to go up and fight Dos Anjos in month X. You need to defend your featherweight belt by this time, or else it goes away. Yeah. Because I just don't think you can put these 2 things in limbo for too long.
My preference is that he fights Edgar next. I don't have any hard feelings if he doesn't. But for me, like, the lightweight picture is not all that. I mean, well, actually, let me take a step back here. I'll tell you one thing I love about McGregor. McGregor Inc.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Everyone's saying McGregor showing up to the press conference, just running it by himself, being like, "There is no way I'm going to abandon this belt to go up to and fight at lightweight." At the very same press conference, UFC was like, "Yeah, he's going to have to do that." Well, look who won that battle. Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
Okay, so McGregor Inc. That's going to be. I'm telling you, that's going to be a story to follow.
Yeah.
How much he flexes and how much they flinch. Okay, so there's that. But for me, it's not all that complicated. Dos Anjos is crazy champion, but Khabib's not around right now. He will be eventually, but not right now. Cerrone out of the picture. I guess he could fight the winner of Pettis versus Alvarez coming up.
Yep.
But I'm not sure how exciting those fights are as a headliner.
Ferguson.
The Pettis fight is an okay rematch, depending on how he looks against Alvarez.
Yeah.
But okay, and then there's Tony Ferguson. Now the Ferguson fight is, and then Diaz, I guess, is kind of out there, but they've already fought. That didn't go. So this Ferguson fight. Now I don't argue that the Dos Anjos versus Ferguson fight would not be amazing. It would be amazing. But from a commercial standpoint, I can understand why the UFC was like, you know what, lightning in a bottle. Let's see what we can do with this. And it may wind up being that they can't convince McGregor to drop the title and in the way that they want. But it may be the case that if he goes up there and gets smoked by Dos Anjos, or he'll just lose a really tough battle against a very, very tough guy who has no other priorities but that lightweight belt, he may say, okay, I'm going to abandon this for now, and it'll make things easier for negotiation down the road. I can understand why they would do it.
So it's all about dollars and cents in the fight game. Let me ask you this. McGregor, considering his star power right now, McGregor-Edgar, McGregor RDA, or wild card McGregor Nate Diaz, which one sells the most?
I really think any of them can sell very, very big. I would probably argue something in the lightweight division just because of the historic moment of it. McGregor's going to sell no matter what. You could make a case that McGregor Diaz might sell the most, and that'd be fine. Look, are any of those anything less than 800,000 buys? How is that possible?
So what about history? Because BJ Penn did it once. They didn't make him drop the title when he went to fight GSP, but with history when history is on the line, and you could say that Conor McGregor, if he wins, will become the first two-way champion in UFC history. Is that enough? Is that big enough to override the other two fights?
Meritorious grounds? I don't know. You can have a debate about that, but I just mean, look, what did UFC do in 2015? We always talked about ambition, doing things differently, trying, betting on themselves, taking risks. Let's take a risk. Let's keep that thing moving. And I feel like, look, if it blows up, how could it blow up in their face? McGregor will have to defend one, and one division will sit. They'll figure it out. They'll put an interim championship there, or they'll make him go back contractually, or I just don't see it as some kind of stumbling block to say no, although I can agree that there are other good possibilities. There's no wrong answer, it's just a degree of right.
And also, there's the idea that a McGregor fight sells no matter who is opposite him on the cage. I think that brings it right back to the idea that we should be making, or the UFC matchmakers should be making these decisions based upon merit and based upon what are the fights that are best for. Best for the fans, but also best for these weight classes. I think that there's a reason why these belts mean something, and the belts in boxing mean nothing. There was a time when in boxing the WBA championship meant something, WBC meant something. Nowadays, it means nothing. I don't think anybody here know when Pacquiao and Mayweather fought. Anybody know who the champion was and what they were the champion of? Nobody knows it. Nobody cares because they spend so much of their effort in that sport trying to just wring every last dollar out of every fight, but not really making the matches that were going to further the weight class as a whole. The UFC has an opportunity to make. Conor McGregor can be a great featherweight champion. He can be if he goes out and beats up Frankie Edgar, that's Mendez, Aldo, and Edgar in 3 consecutive fights. That's an amazing achievement. Or he can go and try to be a 2-division champion. Both of those are interesting possibilities, but I think that the decision has to be made on the merit of what the opportunity is.
I just want to say, sorry to interrupt, it feels like Jeff Wagenheim has finally accepted that McGregor is a pretty good fighter. It sounds...
Because he's actually gone out and done it. He's actually gone out and done
I wanted to hear
Unlike
that.
you, who accepted it by his word.
Foresight.
You were like willing to, like, if the guy went out
I'm
and
able
beat.
to see these things. I was
Yeah,
able
well,
to.
you-
Sometimes you have to,
Well, sometimes
you have to go out on a limb.
The eye test. You see it in front of you. You see it happen.
Some need to see it materialize. Others can see it before it
Yes,
happens.
some people like evidence and some people like faith. I like evidence.
I'm a faith guy. I actually do believe. Go ahead.
In retrospect, though, because we were talking about this before about that Fox card in Orlando coming after this festivity, maybe that it should have been integrated somehow, but I feel like this might have helped RDA, or it would have helped Cerrone tremendously to go out there and have that performance in reverse, because then you're talking, it's almost a slam dunk at that point with Cerrone against McGregor. But I still think that RDA, I just think that he fought at what was UFC 185, and it didn't seem like the needle moved at all.
No.
So I feel like that was a good platform for people to see him get a really explosive win. We'll see how that sort of plays into the intrigue against a guy like McGregor. But the performance alone, rather the charisma, and leave all that aside, just the fact that he was that dominant might be able to sell that fight from his side of it. You know what I'm saying?
But again, that's the only title defense between the two of them. And if McGregor can go out and beat Edgar, and RDA can go out and beat either Pettis, Alvarez, or Ferguson, whoever's next, that elevates the potential super fight. That makes it a real super fight.
You were in Las Vegas and you saw him on the scale. You saw McGregor on the scale. When I saw him on the scale, first of all, I changed my pick. I was originally thinking McGregor, then I went to Aldo because I felt like he just had killed himself to make that weight. And you got to think that that's like the biggest factor in all of this, right? Like that he just doesn't want to have to make that weight, or he can't, or he just feels that it's just too hard, too big of a strain on him.
But if he fights 4 times this year, and let's say he wins the lightweight title, and then he defends the featherweight, and then defends lightweight, and then defends featherweight. I mean, he's as active as most champions in the UFC. You know what I mean? I mean, most champions are fighting twice a year. So let's see if it all plays out. By the way, great point about the boxing titles. I love when there's a big boxing match, and Michael Buffer is like, and New. You still don't really know until he actually says the guy's name. Like, I'm like, who's the champion here? Who's and Still? Who's and New?
Right.
And in the UFC in particular, who's and New and
There's
who's
a
and
value.
Still.
There's a value to the UFC belt, and they need to do what needs to be done in order to keep that value, the value that's totally disappeared in boxing.
Okay, let's move along to this past weekend in Las Vegas, UFC 195. Tremendous fight. We may have seen the fight of the year, the round of the year, the fighter of the. I mean, there's so many great moments came out of that main event alone. It was a great card overall, one that flew under the radar. But Robbie Lawler defeats Lawler-Condit. And first, I want to talk about this judging controversy, because it's come up, and when Joe Rogan says something, he's a very influential and powerful guy. People start to, discuss it more, and it gains steam. I think we all agree that judging in MMA is inconsistent. There's issues with it, but I'm not sure if this is the fight to actually use as your argument. At the end of the day, it feels like everyone agrees that it all came down to the third round. Everyone agrees that round 1 and 2. Round 4 and 5 were unanimously in favor of either Carlos and Robbie. It's the third round. So this is not exactly the fight that speaks to, wow, this big judging problem. You know what I'm saying? It's really not the one. It actually worked this time, in my opinion.
Yeah, but sometimes you'll get scores where the consensus will be post-fight, oh, it comes down to a certain round. And I agree that's the case here. But then you'll see the judges being like, you'll get wacky scorecards where the value is 48-47, but they'll give 5 to one guy and 3 to the other guy when everyone else has the opposite.
This time.
Not this time. But I've been making this point all week on my various podcasts. The 10-point must system had a value because when the UFC and people like Jeff Blatnick and John McCarthy and other players, when they were going around trying to create a framework to get it accepted by athletic commissions, they wanted to borrow something familiar, and I think that makes sense. The 10-point must system feels familiar even if it's ineffective. But like if you had the 10-point must, or if you didn't have a 10-point must system in boxing, you just counted by rounds, right? And you had someone who would knock their opponent down 4 times in 5 rounds and then got outboxed the other 7. And they lost because you're only handing out 1 point each round, you would say, well, that makes no sense. So you add in the 10-point must system to make for a little bit of nuance. I think the reality is there's 2 problems going on. One, in order to work the 10-point must system as it currently stands, you have to be excellent at it. I saw in the Joe Rogan's tweet, Mark Goddard followed up with him being like, Joe, the 10-point must system's not the problem. Okay, in the hands of the extraordinarily best judges. It's not. It's 5 great judges, and then there's a dramatic fall off afterwards. The other problem is if you agree in boxing, and by the way, even for boxing, 10-point muscle system has problems all the time. It's not like they love it either, but at least it works a little bit better for them. But if you went from that 1.10 binary for boxing, then you open it up to 10-9, you're adding nuance. How can you not add nuance from that system that we borrowed and make it into ours? Whether that's more 10-10s, whether that's more 10-8s, whether that's adding 2 more judges, whatever the case may be. I've said this since 2014 on this show. When the UFC goes abroad and they're their own commission, at this point, it's almost like a responsibility to at least try something new. If it doesn't work, fine. But everyone's like, well, what about the legitimacy of these fights? Come on, guys fought 10-minute rounds in Pride, even just 2 weekends ago in Ryzen. It doesn't change the legitimacy of everything. I really think there's some experimentation. We've got to find a better system, but until we have a good answer, we can't do that.
Yeah, I agree. That something needs to happen. This, it comes down to there are just too few rounds in MMA compared to boxing. In a 12-round boxing match, if you get knocked down and it's a 10-8 round, you've got a lot of time to make up for that. In MMA, if you lose the first round 10-8, well, unless you have something very dominant or a finish, the best you're going to expect is a draw after that, because you got to either get a 10-8 back, or if you win the second and third round, you've just made a draw. So because there's a much smaller window, you have to have something that makes it a little less punitive. I mean, I think 10-8 we've heard people talk about 10-7 rounds and how and why aren't there more 10-8s? Because 10-8 is really punitive. It doesn't eliminate, but it dramatically reduces a fighter's chance of coming back to get a comeback win short of a stoppage. So something needs to change, and obviously we're not going to get more rounds. We're not going to suddenly start fighting 10-round MMA fights. So something has to change within the numerical way in which you express the scores. I saw someone online say that they would go with colors. I thought that was
Colors?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
I'm not sure what that.
I mean, the big issue is always that you look at 2 different 10-9 rounds for the same fighter. One can look completely different from the other. And I feel like that's where people are like, how can these be the same? And I really don't know how to fix that. I don't know what you do. I don't know if you like you mentioned the 10-7 and 10-8s. You never see a 10-7 round in MMA. I've never seen one. I don't know, maybe you guys have. I've never seen a 10-7 round. In fact, I remember Doc Hamilton telling me, some quote about it's impossible really to have a 10-7 round under the way that they're judging it, because the guy would have to literally be on the verge of being out the entire way. Like he would have to be surviving an onslaught.
Or get a 10-8 and have a point taken.
Yeah, or that. It has to be something extraordinary. Maybe, within the nuance you're talking about, maybe they can adjust it so that there's a better, like right now a 10-8 round to me is the most obscure thing. I don't, people try to explain a 10-8 round in so many different ways. I'm like, it should be more definitive to me what a 10-8 round is. Maybe that's what they do, is they loosen that so that there are 10-7s. I don't know. I don't know if that's how you do it or not. But Doc Hamilton too had developed a half point system, just so that if there's a very close 10-9 round, it can be 10-9.5, or if it's just not quite a 10, you have a 10-8.5. I mean, those things, I don't know. I'd love to see some experimentation on all of that. I know they've sort of played around a little bit with the half point system, but open scoring, things like that. You just want to see them play around with those things just to see what kind of effect they might have.
Maybe the half point sounds a little bit too wonky or something. So even if they made 10-8 the standard, if you win the round, you get a 10-8. But if it was a really, really close round, ones where it was a razor thin, it's a 9. And if it's a knockdown, it's a 7. And 10-7. If it was like a guy just beating the crap out of it was like, great Maynard beating up Frankie Edgar for an entire round, it's a 10-6. Maybe why do you even have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 if those numbers never come into play? So maybe that's the way the experiment unfolds, where you start to utilize some of the numbers counting down. I mean, I'm not sure whether that would end up. Ultimately, it comes down to people making decisions on what they see in front of them. So whether we're talking about the structure of the scoring, but there's also the whole other side of it where I've seen rounds where there was one of the rounds over the weekend where one fighter won.
Yeah.
One was it
30-27.
30-27, and the other guy won the fight.
Yeah.
How is that possible? How can one person see a fight? every single round going for one guy, and the other two people who are sitting at the right same place or around the same cage see two of those rounds going the opposite way. So you could chalk it up to incompetence, but I also chalk it up to people looking at different things in front of them.
I have so much to say about this. First off, I would love, I know we're in the formative years of the sport, but I would love if there was some dialogue about this. Like, I feel like we've really turned the corner and the sport is evolving. We're really in the 1930s of baseball here, if you get the comparison. And I feel like these commission hearings, especially in Nevada, they are the leaders. There's never any discussion about the state of the judges that they appoint. It's really just like,
yes,
okay,
there is. It's a bunch of backslapping and high-fiving.
well, that, you know what I mean? Like, how did we do? Did Mazzagatti, come? There's never any of that. And maybe it's behind the scenes, but it would be nice, since they're trying to be so, transparent. It would be nice to have more of that. I would also love if, and I believe it was Esther Lynn who tweeted this, if before the main event they would tell us, all right,
who the judges are.
Tony Weeks. This is what he's done in his last, because I think we'd see some pretty, shaky results there. I would also love, and this has really nothing to do with what we were talking about, but if the UFC went back to that Eddie Bravo era where they had someone in between rounds tell them, like Harold Letterman on HBO, I think that kind of prepares the viewer for what's going on, and it tells you, like, if it's so egregious at the end of the day, well, at least there's someone sane in this whole operation that had it the right way. I think that would be great. I would also love, and this is never happening, but if they went to 3, journalists, cage side, and they said, okay, Kevin Iole, John Morgan, Brett Okamoto, we're going to take your scores, and we're going to put it up there at the end. I think that would be good for the viewer. This is all good. The same way I feel like it's good to tell the viewer how much the guy weighed in, before the main event, like they do on HBO broadcast. I think that would be very good.
Just don't use Case Kiefer as one of those.
Yeah,
guys.
that's right. He'll pick it for the wrong guy. We love Case.
That was the one who asked
yes. Las Vegas
Lawler. That is awesome.
But to all your points, I think one of the big problems that hardly gets discussed is these judges and referees are making peanuts for these multi-million-dollar fights. I mean, that is crazy to me. Mark Ramundi said on Monday that John McCarthy made around $1,900 for Aldo McGregor. When you consider how much money was at stake for both men, for the company, $10 million gate, you have to give these guys incentive. How are we going to produce new young talent that wants to go out there and do it, not for the love of the game like Ricardo Almeida, and not because they want, a free ticket, to actually go and make the sport better for all involved? If there's no money at stake, I mean, that's what...
Judges make less.
Yeah,
$800 for when I was doing that Douglas Crosby feature, and just kind of hearing the...
It doesn't make sense, when you look at NBA referees, NFL...
Well, NFL does not have full-time referees, officials. So
Yes.
so that's another...
How much do they make?
I don't know what they make, but they're not full-time.
Well, I can understand that they're only...
They also have a union too, don't they?
They do, but they're only working 16 weeks a year. I mean, a couple of preseason and playoffs. These guys
think
are...
about the amount of money that's in that sport compared to... I mean,
Sure.
This sport is a drop in the bucket compared to what... So the problems are pretty... And believe me, we can spend an hour just going on to some of the issues that they have, where they have somebody in the booth or in New York, looking at all the challenge calls on the field and telling us with all definitiveness that the call is going to be overturned, and then it ends up not being overturned by the guys at the game. So there's all kinds of
But don't you think
issues
the three decision makers who are deciding whether or not Robbie Lawler is going to make X amount of money, that's essentially what they're deciding. This is prize fighting. Deserve, a little bit more than what they're making? Maybe that will help them up their game.
And more training.
Yeah.
That's another part too. They get a lot more training to be in an NFL. You want, if you're going to be whoever the game that Joe Buck and Troy Aikman are calling on Sundays, the referees in that game are no joke. It's often Ed Hockley and his team too, by the way. But okay, do you remember a couple of seasons ago, maybe it was, I can't even remember how long ago it was at this point, when the umpires, the referees in NFL went on strike?
Yeah.
And they had those scabs they brought in?
Yeah.
And you were like, oh my God. What you realized was there is a professional class of referees and officiating that goes on in the NFL, a literal professional class. That's what these guys do by occupation, and you're accustomed to the highest level of that. That doesn't exist at all in this sport. It is semi-pros from coast to coast, and some are better than others. Some could even be pros, but this is my point. You have literally a handful of people who can do this job with a hampered system and still basically make it work. But when you take the fact that you have a system that is not great, and then you have a volunteer army of diggity donks all over the planet, you're going to get some screwy decisions. It's just, and also judging generally is just very, very difficult anyway.
What about this idea of having more than three? 3 in the arena, 3 in the back. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like strength in numbers, if we have more, 6, 8, then we could get a better majority, no?
I don't know how you guys feel about this. I'm a firm believer that, show me some data. Like run these in shows and show me the data. Show me what it looks like, because everything you say sounds so good, and then people who are I don't believe in it, but people who are big open scoring acolytes will tell you, man, look at all these benefits. Okay, show me on paper. Exactly. That's what I need to see.
Well, in Jersey at the CFFC show, they had this thing where guys were in the back. At least they're trying.
Right.
We got to try. We got to try to make it better. Enough with the belly aching. Let's try to make this better. But I feel like the current system just doesn't work. And I'm just throwing out an idea. I'm not a decision maker here, but I don't feel like there's a lot of dialogue. Like, are these judges in Jersey, in Florida, in Texas, in California, in Vegas, in Nevada, I should say, is there a year-end review? Are they sitting down with Bob Bennett or Andy Foster in California and saying, okay, let's look at your body of work here, And to your point, like All-Star games, Super Bowls, the best of the best make it there. Like it's a gift to work those. Are the best of the best doing the big fights? We know that it's in refereeing, we know it's John McCarthy, Herb Dean, a couple others here and there, Jason Herzog. But are the judges really the best of the best? Did they earn the right to be decision makers in these fights? It's a little troubling, right?
It's been ongoing for so long. It's like the sport is obviously so young. It's had to overcome so many red flags, bring those down, had to come over these taboos, everything that's had to cross over. But this is that one archaic bit that's still there that you're like, man, I can't believe we're still talking about this. At some point, they have to start experimenting. They got to figure something out because I feel like this will just be ongoing forever.
Okay, let's put our Joe Silva / Dana White / Lorenzo Fertitta hats on right now, and let's talk about that fight and what's next, because we could break it down all we want, but let's move on. Robbie Lawler has to fight someone next. If you're the UFC, who are you picking? Because it seems to me like there's 3 options on the table, but who are you picking for him?
Give me my 3 options so I can go.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do.
I mean, I think that that same night was. I'm looking at I'm thinking of the whole totally different fight. That's weird.
I'm thinking middleweight.
Yeah, I was thinking middleweight. I was thinking, well, there's only one option I can think of. But
yes. Did you just have a Case Kiefer moment?
I had a moment where I was like, I was going to put put poor Robbie in with Yoel Romero, and I was like, that would have been.
He used to fight at middleweight.
I actually knew you were doing that. I could see him.
Really?
I'm thinking, who else but Yoel Romero is going to get this fight?
We'll get to that one.
Okay. Now let me
welterweight.
Let me
170
think. 170 pounds.
Robbie
the
Lawler,
GSP.
Carlos Condit.
I don't think it's GSP.
Okay.
I don't think that GSP is the guy. I think that he's. I think he's the white elephant that's floating out in the ethers.
But again, if I can interrupt, I'm not saying what you think. It's what you try to do. What's the best decision here? You know what I'm saying?
The best decision is the next guy who's earned the shot. I mean, I'm of the belief that it's not. It's not that while the finances is always the underlying part of this, but once you put a championship belt on the line, the finances have to sort of follow. I'm having a problem. I'm having problems here today. This is a bad one. The finances are having. The finances have to follow the meritocracy. So one of you guys is going to talk about.
Okay, just give me a name.
Go ahead. Just go.
No name? Okay, go ahead.
I would go with Woodley, on the sense that he was, and it was actually sort of like he was well placed that night, obviously, to be there to remind everybody in this hysteria, like check it out, here I am, I'm still here.
Sure.
And there's a part of me that's like, Carlos Condit sort of had to leapfrog some people anyway to get to this, to get to a spot. Now, we now know that he has chemistry to fight a guy, there's going to have great chemistry against a guy like Robbie Lawler in the cage. You'd love to see that again. But I think you got to go with Woodley just to keep things flowing. Also, you got to look back. I mean, it's almost like at this point they should be, looking at their guy Lawler and saying, well, this is old hat. Like he's put on the fight of 2015 to 2014, he's always having those types of fights. The kinds that were like, wow, that was a crazy fight. So in some ways, I'm like, I think you got to just keep it moving along. I can't justify just putting Carlos Condit back in just because they had chemistry in that fight.
I can feel him stewing. Yeah. It's just like the smoke is coming out of his ears.
I don't want him to retire, by the way.
Sure,
if it was hinged on that, maybe you'd be. I don't know, but.
I mean, steam is a strong word.
Okay. Well, you were stewing. You were going back and forth.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, the arguments about that Condit got the title shot to begin with under the sort of looser interpretation of meritocracy. I mean, these arguments are ironclad. I can't argue against that. But there's lots of reasons why guys get rematches. There can be all kinds. I mean, Aldo got smoked, and you could say, well, things were left unsettled because it was 13 seconds. Okay, but really, what you're talking about there is that he has a insane resume by which he's deserving. But to me, all these things kind of point to like the abuse of how much promoters have used rematches against fans' own interests. And so you have this like gag reflex, even in a case like this one where it's like the best case scenario.
Yep.
Two guys go in there and give you magic, and your response is, let's bring in someone else. What? What are you talking about? How could you say that? In boxing, you had Vasquez and Marquez go at it, and you had to do it a number of times. Pacquiao and Marquez, a number of times. Why? Because it was the most important fight you could make? I mean, in some cases it was. In some cases it was just because when you put these two together, you get a chemical reaction. And in this case, it's more than that. It was a chemical reaction for a fight that many people, your boy included, scored that fight for Carlos Condit. I firmly believe this is something that, and to your point, he might retire if you don't get. Now that's not. He can't arm twist the division. I'm just saying, lastly here, that you have meritocracy, you have an insane chemical reaction, you have the I'm not saying a dearth of headliners, but a clear headlining moment you can have again, not a co-main event. Like, why would you not take that up?
And by the way, credit to Carlos Condit.
That's
your pick.
I got my. I'm no more water, but it's.
I just want to say,
when you were first asked this, the first fight I was thinking of, it wasn't the title fight. It was I still want to see Woodley and Hendricks go at it because that was the fight I really was looking forward to seeing.
Yeah.
Then when it fell apart,
Yeah.
it seemed like there's Hendricks is probably ranked more highly than Woodley, at least certainly in my book he is. But I think that because he could have blew his opportunity, I think he has to step aside. And I think Woodley's the guy because he's the next in line. And I know that Condit put on a great fight, but he was a challenger. He fell short. Got to move on.
Credit to Condit, by the way, for throwing the retirement thing out there. And really, he had been hinting it for a while. But for never saying at the press conference, like, I'm going to retire if they don't give me this. He really just said, like, I don't know if I want to do it. I think he handled that loss with the utmost class.
He's always been that way.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy is so likable on so many levels.
Absolutely. My mom's favorite fighter, by the way. I think for other reasons other than his actual fighting skills. So I will say that the UFC has made a habit in recent years of putting together immediate rematches that the public doesn't really seem to want, or at least they weren't asking for. Barao Dillashaw comes to mind. Verdum Kane comes to mind as well.
I was just about to say the exact same thing.
This is one that actually I think the public would be in favor of, and it's not the no-brainer that it's, at least for us, that it seems to be for them.
I absolutely believe that reasonable people can disagree, but you cannot tell me that the arguments about Lawler-Condit rematching are not impacted by rematch fatigue. It has affected everyone's brain to be like, I don't know. Whereas if we didn't have that many rematches, you'd be like, you know what? That's looking kind of interesting.
True, and I would admit to some of that myself. There's some point where you're like, man, you keep bottlenecking these things, and
I mean, that's the same reason why I was like, okay, I'm fine with Rousey not getting home. I'm fine with with Aldo not getting McGregor, even though 13-second loss, a flash knockout. You want to see those guys compete against each other more. Plus, Aldo was a champion.
Sure.
Rousey was a champion.
Sure.
Cain Velasquez was a champion.
Yep.
I mean, I can understand why Barao was a champion. You lose a championship belt, you get a rematch.
But in all those fights, the champion got smoked. Okay, fine, give him the chance. Here, everyone thinks that Condit won. But
not everybody. Most people. There's a lot of people.
Fair enough.
I had Condit winning, but
there's enough people.
You watch that third round. It was razor thin.
And by the way, the first and second rounds are razor thin as well. Here's my point, though. For my take on this and what's the right answer, if they haven't reached out to GSP yet, and if they're not on the first plane to Montreal to try to get him to fight Robbie Lawler next, it's 4 days too late. To me, if you look at the state of the UFC right now, and you look at the way things are shaking out with a potential Holm-McGregor fight before UFC 200, with John Jones fighting before UFC 200, what's going to headline UFC 200? I tell you what could headline UFC 200, the return of GSP against Robbie Lawler.
Good point.
GSP... I bring my entire bank account and I say, GSP, what do we got to do to make this fight? That's the fight. It's a no-brainer to me. It's GSP. And if you listen to everyone around GSP, from Faraz, from Freddie Roach, they're all telling us that he's ready to go. It's just him that's not telling us that. And if you listen to the talk before he retired, they were all telling us he's going to retire, except him. It seems like when it's GSP involved, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think he's ready. I think he's kind of sitting back. I think Carlos-Condit losing was the best thing if you want GSP to come back, because he wanted no part of Carlos-Condit. He always told us that Condit gave him the worst beating, that it took him, that kind of expedited his departure. Robbie Lawler, after what he did to Rory, after what he's doing as of late, Robbie Lawler is making a serious push now to start being in that discussion for one of the best welterweights of all time, or welterweight champions. Like, what he's doing is pretty remarkable. GSP Robbie Lawler could headline UFC 200. Do you guys disagree? I know it may not be the biggest fight, but if you look at the landscape, that's 200 worthy.
There's no fight you can justify over a GSP return.
Right.
You just can't do it. A guy who just walked away from the division would come back, it would be huge. As much as I'm sympathetic to Condit's case, the only trump card is GSP.
And I feel like it's a real thing right now.
It could be.
Because I feel like they need him more than ever.
And he's also a champion in absentia. I mean, he's a guy who walked away as a champion. So you're not having to stretch your boundaries of what merits a title shot. You're not taking. It's not like he. I mean, a lot of people thought he lost the fight to Hendricks at his last fight, but he didn't lose it. He got his arm raised at the end. If he had walked away as the loser and Hendricks had been crowned that night, I'd have a little different opinion. But because he walked away as a champion, when he comes back, he gets this cut in line. That's just the way it is.
Any chance Nick Diaz can be back by then for a big Matt Brown showdown?
It did come out that he's on the agenda for the next Nevada Athletic Commission hearing next Tuesday, I believe it is, and I'm still hearing 18 months is on the table and a real possibility. However, if timing works, he actually comes back in August. He misses 200, and he would be 200 worthy. But
just want to point out, we connected the Nick Diaz ongoing thing from 2015 to now, 2016. Well done. Well done.
Yeah, well, Nevada will still be a story. My story of the year last year, their incompetence. Okay, go ahead. You want to say something?
They could maybe make it a 16-month thing instead of an 18-month.
Yeah, right.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
That would be nice. Let me ask you, okay, let's look into our crystal balls. Stipe Miocic, does he in fact get the next title shot? Does this actually happen?
I'm going to say no, he does not, even though I think he's the more deserving candidate. I think it's going to be Overeem. I had a reader reach out to me and send me an article. Overeem spoke to the Danish press saying...
The Danish press?
Oh, sorry, what am I saying? Danish press. The Dutch press.
Yeah.
Jesus.
That would have been...
I was thinking about Martin Kampmann.
You work for Reebok?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. I was thinking about Martin Kampmann before the fight. Or the Jesus Christ, the show today.
Yes.
Overeem spoke to the Dutch press, and he sent it to me. And if you read it, Overeem, he won't comment on the negotiations with UFC specifically. And I thought if he had lost, he'd be a great candidate for Bellator. Yeah. But he says in the article, the most important thing for his career right now is to get a UFC heavyweight title. It's the only thing missing from his whole thing. That to me tells me he's got some pretty clear priorities. He's got tremendous leverage. Yeah. So as much as I like Stipe, and I think he's the guy who should be it, I really feel like absent contract negotiations, it's Stipe. But with contract negotiations and Overeem, this is just too much.
He played his cards.
We've seen Gilbert Melendez get a title shot from it. So,
Yeah.
What do you think? Poor Stipe.
I hate to acknowledge that being correct. Not because I don't want you to be right.
Jeff.
It's not because I don't want you to be right, but because I just don't like
Albert Tumanov.
I just don't like that kind of matchmaking. But that's the reality. If Overeem was a lightweight, or if he was a featherweight, this wouldn't be the case. But the UFC is not going to allow a contending heavyweight to go over to Bellator.
Especially with a strong fan base.
Especially a guy who's coming off a big win over the guy who I thought was the second best heavyweight, well, the third best heavyweight in the world, and has also, I mean, he's beaten, he beat Lesnar when Lesnar was sort of fading, but still was a big name. I mean, Overeem, for all of his troubles, he certainly had a sagging part of his career, but he has had some real highlight victories, and UFC doesn't want that to be part of Bellator's, they don't want that to be Bellator business. And so if he really pushes it and says, we'll sign with you if you give us that fight right now, I have a feeling he might succumb. Maybe they'll say, give us one more win, and I'd be fine with that. If he could get one more win, I mean, Miocic is the guy. There's no question. Miocic is the guy who's earned this title shot. Sometimes we just don't get what we earn, though.
Yeah, but where is Stipe from?
Yes.
Cleveland.
Yes.
Nobody from Cleveland
Heartbreak
gets a title
City.
shot.
Yes, Heartbreak City. Gosh,
Stipe,
they're going to hate you.
But Stipe, you look at what they've done recently. I think Overeem's won 4 of his last 5. They've been trying to prime him anyway. They were trying to work him into that title space back in the day with the whole Brock Lesnar back in those days.
He got a title shot against JDS,
right.
but he failed.
Exactly right. That's what I'm trying to say. But they've been trying to position him because they know that's you just look at him, you're like he's got a certain appeal of being in that title shot. So I feel like that's still the case. I feel like Stipe is kind of like more of like the Rothwell guy in this, but he's further along. Like he's just not. There's always going to be like, is there a sexier matchup? Arlovsky would have been that guy, but now he's out of the picture. So I feel like when it really comes down to it, their resumes for where they're at are fairly close. But Stipe Miocic, really might have put the, I don't want to say the nails in the coffin for JDS, but he didn't look the same in his last fight, obviously, for the guy who Overeem beat. To me, knocking out Arlovsky just by itself, where Arlovsky had come from and what was all going on, to me, he's got the better resume. He should get the title shot, but considering that the leverage that Overeem has and sort of what the UFC, I know what they've kind of have wanted Overeem in that shot, I just feel like he's going to be the guy.
And
it's
also
not a travesty, but it's just it's the wrong fight. But it's not.
It's
not a
the wrong
travesty.
fight.
This is not John Jones versus Chael Sonnen.
Sure.
This is not.
Reem is on an impressive winning streak as well, a longer one, by the way, than Miocic. I know his loss to JDS was controversial a little bit, but he has win. How about Ben Rothwell? Ben Rothwell's fighting on Fox. He's fighting Josh Barnett. He beat Reem, so he might have a case in the matter.
That's what I'm saying. He should have.
I know I'm guilty of this because I ask it a lot, but sometimes I wish they just didn't say, title shot tonight, shake hands, because we're just setting ourselves up. I mean, look at Frankie. He got a title shot on Friday, and then it was taken away on Saturday. I just look at the emotion that we never seen Stipe like that before. Could you imagine how he'll react if he doesn't get a title shot?
This is why these guys say, I'd fight that guy tonight.
Yeah,
because they know that tomorrow the title fight might be just taken away.
Okay, so let me make you feel better here. Middleweight title picture. Luke Rockhold is the new champ. Yes, tell me who should fight him.
Is this your rant on Lawler?
Yes, I'm going Tyron Woodley.
Perfect. That's a great call. No,
Romero certainly wasn't a. I won't say there's a cloud over his win over Sousa, but there certainly was a little bit of fogginess in the atmosphere. But I think he's just got to be the guy.
Okay, it doesn't seem like Luke wants him, right? He's certainly not campaigning. He's actually campaigning for Vitor Belfort.
Well, everybody is. Still,
everyone loves that.
Is that the biggest money fight? Is it the Weidman rematch?
Belfort fight?
Yeah,
probably. I mean, it's the biggest star he can fight, right? So
is that bigger than Weidman too?
Probably. Vitor Belfort is a bigger name than Chris Weidman, maybe, at this point. Certainly internationally, he's got a bit more of a name. But I just feel like Romero's the fight. This is a case where, again, I saw some people being like, there's a little bit of chirping, not much, just a little bit. People are like, what about a Weidman rematch? I'm like, yeah, what about it? Luke Rockhold went in there and took his title from him. End of story. You want another shot at him? That's fine. You get back in the queue and you work your way up, and I am confident, in fact, that he will. They will meet again. I have no doubt about that. I like Weidman to beat Romero or Jacare on any given day, to be perfectly honest. But Romero's the guy. Romero, look, man, the dude does the old, the Dominican merengue two-step. I know he's Cuban, but he comes out to Juan Luis Guerra, a Dominican merengue, and he's on the line between breaking all the rules and in total compliance. He is a habitual line dancer. That is what he is, man, and he's always going to be that way. So get a good officiating crew in there, get a good commission, have it in a good state, New Jersey or California or whatever, somebody that can watch what he's doing and make the fight happen. And then, of course, Luke Rockhold's from California, so that's the fight to make, for sure.
What about Vitor? Because that is the big money fight, and we're all about making big money fights here. Should the UFC? I kind of feel like Vitor brings so much baggage along with him. You know what I'm saying?
We had this whole discussion before about this, but yeah. I don't know. What about Vitor? I mean, the bottom line is he's in a great position in the sense that the champion, he's now got a champion who really wants to fight him. So in some ways you're like, well, what better than that when the champion is actually calling you out because he wants to avenge a loss that he feels was unjust? I mean, in some ways it's the perfect scenario for Vitor Belfort. It just remains to be seen. I wouldn't be opposed to it, honestly, because Vitor's, he was his last win and the division sort of being where it's at. But I agree with you guys. I just think that Romero, is close to a definitive guy that's next. He's the guy. You know what I mean? Like, he would be the guy. Plus, you have there's guys like Tim Kennedy who are calling out Belfort, and I'm like,
Kennedy.
But I mean, you look where they're at. I mean, if you even look at the rankings at all, it's like you look where they're at, and like, well, that would sort of, why not? Why not?
Oh, by the way, my God was like, I would pay big money just for that, like
exactly
the pre-fight hype.
That's
Kennedy
the kind
and
of fight
Belfort.
I want to see Belfort fight. Honestly, at this point,
it would be so much fun.
Yeah, so I would still go Romero because I just think that he's he got his arm, his hand raised in that fight, so I feel like he's the guy.
The night that Rockhold won the title on the Fox post-fight show, the first thing he mentions, or one of the first things he mentioned, was that he wants to fight Vitor Belfort. And on the panel that night was Michael Bisping, and I thought Bisping, you could just see him visibly sag, like oh my God, it was just this, and that was the first time, the only time I've thought, as much as I love the Bisping Anderson Silva fight, that was the one moment I wish that Bisping didn't have a fight on the horizon, because he could have just said, you know what, I know you and I don't see eye to eye, Luke, but I'll take care of that guy, you know, because Bisping, just like Rockhold, had a pretty low moment of his career against pumped up Vitor, and that would have been the justice. That Luke Rockhold it would be like almost a Rocky with the guys that don't like each other. Luke cornering Bisping to fight against Vitor, but unfortunately, or actually fortunately, we're going to get to see Bisping against Anderson Silva over in London, which is a bigger fight, more fun. But this would have been the kind of the justice that would have ended it all.
Great segue, because 2016, in my opinion, is going to be a fascinating year for MMA. There's so many interesting storylines from Reebok and USADA, of course, potential return of GSP. Nick Diaz situation, free agency, I think is super interesting. One of the big stories to watch, in my opinion, is the evolution of Fight Pass.
100%.
And we are getting a glimpse at where they're going. Eric Winter, by the way, I had a chance to talk to him a couple times this past weekend.
Smart guy.
Fascinating and super sharp and really gets it. I mean, this is a guy, and look at the way he interacts with fans online. He's just, the guy is perfect.
He is all in on Fight
Yeah.
Pass. Like, he's committed.
Absolutely. I mean, just look at this one coming up, Paul Felder, Darren Cruikshank. I mean, they're putting fights, bigger fights on Fight Pass. Poirier, Duffy, of course, Van Zandt, Rose, all that stuff. Bisping, Anderson Silva is a perfect indication of where we went from Hyung-Gu Lim, back in the day for the first one to this. So it's a big deal. And one of the big things that they're doing is this Looking for a Fight show, starring Dana White and Matt Serra and Nick the Tooth. and so I'm dying to ask you this question. And so there's this hint that they may have found CM Punk's opponent.
Oh joy.
But listen to me for a second. Put aside your feelings on him fighting, because now it's a reality. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
It really is going to happen. We've been sitting on this for over a year. So put aside that for a second.
Yep.
Was this the best way to do it?
100%. Yeah. First of all, it looks like...
Mickey Gall is the kid's name.
Yeah. Actually, a guy from my own gym went to high school with Mickey Gall, played football with him. Can you believe that? Small world. Yeah, I like it. I think that, I don't know if this is going to be the show that they're going to usher in so they can usher out Ultimate Fighter. Maybe they'll both exist at the same time. I don't know. It's highly derivative of the old Tap Out show and Versus from those who remembered it, but that was a good show that worked. Yep. Lots of good guys were on that show. Some not so good. Matt Major, some really great. John Dodson. So it wound up being really successful. But I like the fact that they're putting it online. I really believe that when Fight Pass launched, they could not have done not a worse job. I mean, but they didn't do a good job. We'll put it that way. But I like how they're doubling down. I really like how they're putting things behind it. But to the CM Punk thing, look, everyone was talking about, well, what about the Cahal Pendred thing? And everyone's like, well, now that he's retired, you can't make it. I'm going to say this as often as I have a camera. Cahal Pendred, you could pull him out of that chopped he's opening up in Dublin right now, and he would wash CM Punk, just so you understand the levels of mixed martial arts. He could not do a sit-up for 6 weeks and bulldoze him, okay? And you can say whatever you want about Cahal Pendred's abilities. So going out on a show, marrying stuff from the web, our own cameraman, Casey, was saying, because I was talking about, you can launch a star from YouTube. He's like, hello, Kimbo Slice. Great point. Yeah. So I really feel like it just brings together a lot of needs they have where they can overlook the fact that CM Punk has no ability and they can funnel in this kid because they went to the regional show and here's me eating a cheesesteak and whatever.
But they can keep coming back to say, oh, we found this guy on fight, so it's another
I love
way.
it. I love it.
And I don't know if you've seen his interviews, but I feel like this is the perfect kid. He's 1-0 and he's actually selling it. Like he's making fun of his wrestling background. He's not just some wide-eyed kid. the credential. Actually,
He's not Greg Nudge.
Exactly, and now
Who's just a literal human body that
exactly.
they put in there.
And if he comes in there and wins, they have a guy who they've been building up for 6 months now. He's still in the dark. I like how it may not be organic. I may be naive, but I like how this all feels. It's not a tough cast off. It's a guy who went on the mic and called him out, and now they're kind of.
The great thing about the show, though, is
that's the way it comes across.
Right.
it's all associative to prospects, right? Like they're finding these prospects out there that are sort of waiting to come up, just like with Sage. Yeah. So there's a prospect, but I like that there's a reverse sort of mentality on this too. That's basically saying that CM Punk is a prospect in MMA. That's all he is. They're basically making that point, and they've never really come out and made any kind of direction on what they want to do with him in terms of it's up to him to get healthy and when he's ready to fight. Well, this is the first time where you're right. You really understand the kind of guy that they're looking to put him against, and it's sort of a perfect. They're introducing him, they're bringing him up. He's 1-0, right? That's the kind of guy he's supposed to face. That's when you really think about it, you're like, he needs to fight somebody who has either no experience or just a fight or two.
A commission wouldn't give up.
That's what I'm saying.
They couldn't get it approved.
And that guy and Mickey, it was smart enough to really think that stuff through. Yeah. So for him to actually play it, it's his name being Gall. I was like, wow, what Gall on that kid? Yeah. It's just it was a great job. That's a Chuckism right there. You like that? Seen one. You like that?
I just think this is a great example of where Fight Pass has come and why it's actually fulfilling I don't want to say a need, but I guess it is a need. When we first heard about this stuff coming online, it was essentially we're going to get to see old UFC fights. This was a chance to I want to watch Royce Gracie and his old fights. That's a great thing, and for certainly some segment of the MMA fan base is great to be able to watch old fights. Even myself, when I'm preparing a preview of a championship fight, I'm always going on to Fight Pass and watching the champion and the challenger's last 4 or 5 fights, and it's a great resource. But then we see the fight cards, and the fight cards start getting better. Not every single one of them, but just enough to make you want to continue that $10 a month subscription. And then we get to see the show. I think the show, aside from the fact that it's possibly bringing about the challenger or the opponent for CM Punk, it's also just doing it in an entertaining way. Yeah. I mean, how can you lose by having Matt Serra on a TV show? I mean, this guy is
watching fathers, like frat brothers. Not the most interesting thing in the world.
You're wrong. Matt Serra is great.
I'm not the audience. That's true. Yes.
Matt Serra is an entertaining guy. I think Nick the Tooth's entertaining. I think Dana White's kind of like the straight man in this whole thing. He just stands back, lets these two guys go at it. He's the Larry and the Three Stooges in this example, just sort of letting the other guys do their job.
And when I'm watching Dana White looking for a fight, it's Luke Thomas looking to fast forward to the fights.
Well, there's a lot of synergy there. Sage, they pick him out. He fights on Fight Pass. This kid, Randy Brown, he's fighting on Fight Pass in Newark. So
love that.
It's smart.
Look,
there's
synergy. I'm not the audience, but the show is a hit. You look at the comments, people love it. Let's be clear about that. But I want to make one point about Fight Pass that I think is being left out here. Like UFC's they brought in Eric Winter. They're doing like all kinds of playlists now. Fight of the night and for up until now till 200 I think every day. These are all kind of great, but I really feel like they're looking around now and they're seeing some of the cable cutting that's happening, and they're seeing all the stories that are coming out about ESPN being a burden to everyone's cable package. They're 3 years away before they can renew this Fox deal? That is a very long time. And I'm not saying they wouldn't renew it, but what I'm saying is, what kind of money are they really going to get from it? In 2011, when they signed this deal, I bet they thought, when we re-up for this, we're going to get huge dollars. I don't know if that's going to be the case when it comes around. You might as well invest in the native thing that you have, that you completely own, you can completely control. Maybe you could turn to a big source of revenue. I cannot commend them more for putting them it's on YouTube, but it came from Fight Pass, looking for a fight, and for putting things like Bisping versus Silva on there. I think it's absolutely the right call, and I completely support it.
Okay, final very quick thing, because we're pretty much out of time. But you mentioned Martin Kampmann.
Yeah. He
officially announced his retirement.
Yeah.
I'm putting you guys on the spot. Favorite Martin Kampmann moments? Something come to mind? Anything?
I would say either withstanding the punches of Drew McFedries, but more than that, being in big trouble against Thiago Alves and gutting it out and coming back and choking him out. And then he always had the best, grin like that. Martin Kampmann might be the most underrated fighter ever, because I really believe if he had not that he had horrible durability, but if he had slight more durability, he could have been a champion. Would he have beaten GSP? I don't know, but he lost the opportunity because of that Shields fight, which was very controversial. He was a championship caliber fighter. He could do it all. He was super tough. I have nothing but respect for Martin Kampmann.
Any others come to mind?
I would say for me, it was UFC 88. It was one of the first fights I was cage side for. He's fighting Nate Marquardt, and I just never forget. It was you could hear the punches landing, and just he's a very fluid sort of boxer, and he was willing to take some to deliver some. And I remember thinking, it had that sort of visceral feeling, like if you're watching two guys just start fist fighting at near the lockers or something. It had that sort of feeling. He got chopped down in that fight, but I had this utmost respect for him after that. I started really paying more attention to his boxing and everything that came out of that fight, just from the way he encountered him. And so that fight, in my mind, has always stuck out. And unfortunately, the other one that I always think of is the one where Paul Daly sort of stood in against him, and I felt so bad for him having talked to him.
His two losses are what comes to
well.
mind
I mean, he had a lot of great fights, but I mean, I just remember him kind of, I don't know, how would you say it? Like just having to sort of be a professional through that whole thing, because we didn't know people didn't know Paul Daly all that well, and that was his coming out party. And I remember Martin Kampmann just upholding himself like a true professional after that whole thing.
Great way to describe him as well, because he was always a professional.
Yeah.
He did kind of try to spoil a lot of parties. The Shields one, he was super close to ruining that whole thing. You can make the case that he won that fight. Also, remember that Jake Ellenberger fight? Remember that at the TUF finale? Kind of spoiled that party as well. Very underrated takedown defense, and never really felt like he got the respect that he deserved. A little bit later on as a coach of Team Alpha Male, but he's no longer doing that. We wish him the best, one of the good guys in the sport. Calling it quits officially this week. All right, we're done. Thank you so much for watching. It's a rare, quiet weekend this coming weekend in mixed martial arts. Nothing big, but next weekend in Boston, Chuck and I will be there. Will you be there?
I'll be there.
Jeff will be there.
I was gonna say I can still taste that IPA.
Yeah.
You're dead to me.
Dominic Cruz, TJ Dillashaw, rapidly approaching. For now, we say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. That is Luke. That is Jeff. That is Chuck. I am Ariel. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the fights.